I was just listening to a press holding by Mayor Brandon Johnson and some of the presidents around the wards. Let me say this, right? I think they're the most responsible government in the nation right now. We can't do anything about funding. We can't do anything about public engagement. You know, he basically just told everybody, like, you all need to, you know, speak up. You know, he was telling the communion that, and me personally, I would love to move back to Chicago, but I think like moving back to Chicago, you know, it would take away from the progress that's being made in some of the other places where people are leaving and where people are going. The effort of the president saying, we need you all to step up and basically make your stakeholdership present, right? You know, be involved. I think them saying that, I think her saying that, right? I think her saying that is just, it's value, in my opinion, you know what I mean? Because you don't see other city municipals doing anything about the simultaneous of a particular district getting involved or a particular child being put in a position where they can one for once, you know, be governor of a state that they live in. You know, like personally, right? You look at, you know, cities in the Midwest, right? A lot of cities in the Midwest, you know, outside of Chicago, right? They're not doing enough to, you know, obtain that aspirational or that inspirational response that a kid gets when he wants to be the governor or when he wants to be the mayor. You know, like, you live in a place for 15 years at a time, such as like in my case, right? And you make attempts to be progressive, you make attempts to be conservative, but you know, there's no state house or there's no state senator saying, I want you all to come to the Capitol, you know, come to Lansing and, you know, be a hot box representative. You know what I mean? Like, be a senator representative, or, you know, be a speaker at a house, or be a budgeter. You know, they're not reaching out to some of these communities and saying things like that. They're just not. And any attempt that something like that ever happens, right, you want to be engaged. You want to be prepared. You want to be pronounced in your decision. You know, you just don't go to a place because you feel like, you know, it has a good living standard. You know what I mean? Like, that's not the cue. You should go to a place because you know for a fact that the people there are healthy. You know, you go there because you know for a fact the people have the right epidemics. You know, like, they farm. The people there, they walk instead of drive. You know, those are the things you look for. And I think, like, being in Michigan, right, you have that with the Amish. You know, like, even I support their products, right? You know, even I support Amish products. I buy their honey, you know what I mean? I buy their trail mixes, you know, I do that because they understand how, you know, living off the land is supposed to be. Even living off the land, right? And a lot of Amish communities do this in Michigan, right? They don't necessarily rely on technology, you know. Their system is live with as less government and live with as less technology as possible, you know. And the idea that Detroit is not following that model, or Muskegon is not following that model, or Grand Rapids is not following that model, I think that's criminal. You know, Inkster, Flint, you know, governments have to be told, you know, don't disrupt the politics of the people. We know what the people need, and we know where their weaknesses are, even if they can't necessarily exchange a conversation about, you know, what the budget requires in a half quarter or the third quarter, what it needs, you know. Well, we know police are not supposed to be getting funded, you know, and we also know that jails are not supposed to be funded. If someone does a crime and they feel like, you know, they're going to get away with it, you know, being that there's innocence involved, you know what I mean? Like, then in those type of governments, right, a centralist government, you know, whoever you did a deal with, because, you know, America just did a deal with Saudi Arabia, export some of these people to these countries, you know what I mean? Like, export them, you know? You commit a crime, then let Saudi Arabia deal with it, you know what I mean? Let them deal with it. Because, like, America is taking on too much leverage. They're taking on too much leverage, you know? It's no way Trump should be leader of the free world and he's making bad business deals in America, you know, continually, right? Without even the consent of a public council, a national advisory, right? An international advisory in the African Union. Forget the UN, you know what I mean? Forget them, right? The African Union. Great peace, Yakoki.